Hello. Excuse me. Hello. Good morning, everybody. Happy Monday. It is 10 o'clock on the dot. I am here. Welcome to the Chattering Magpies live read. We are reading, oh boy, we are reading Jane Eyre, of course. And this is actually our 9th session, I believe it is. Correct me if I'm wrong. Yes, it is our 9th session, and we are ready and excited for all the things that are coming up in this chapter, especially since the last chapter left us in quite a lot of turmoil. At least it left not us, but Jane in quite a lot of emotional turmoil. Oh boy. But before I do a little rundown summary, TLDR for those that haven't joined us lately, let me do so. Let me say hello to the Early Gang. Hello, Early Gang. All right. So who do we have? We have first goes to Liz Lepper. Hey Liz, how are you? Congratulations, you get first comment award. Have all of these hearts. Take them all. They're all yours. Lovely to see you, and congratulations. Tomorrow is your final. I hope you do amazing. I know you will do amazingly. I saw you posted one of your class's final projects. So yes, that looked great, and I hope that you do excellent. I know you will, but just wishing you the best in your exam. Who else do we have on the Early Gang chat? We have Crusher. Hey Crusher, how are you? Reporting in, the Early Gang reporting in. Hello, welcome, happy to see you here. And we also have Blockshot. How are you? Hello everyone, and good morning, evening, afternoon, night, depending on the time zone. I know you're part of the Europe gang, so I'm happy that I was able to do this on a time that you were able to join us. So hopefully you enjoy this and it helps you relax as you wind down in your evening and relax. So I don't know, there's a lot of exciting stuff coming up in the book, so I don't know how stimulating the read will be, or if it'll be like relaxing and mellow. We'll see. We also have Little Butterfly. Hello, how are you? Welcome. Thank you for the meme. I'll share it a little later. And yes, so we are here gathered today to read Jane Eyre, the book. And I weighted the pros and cons of showing you guys here on live the scene where Jane discovers the fire and stuff like that. But unfortunately, I decided that probably YouTube would be like a jerk and would like copyright strike me with that. Yeah, so I was like, yeah, it's okay. I'll just not. So I'll leave it to you guys when we're done reading Jane Eyre to check out all of the adaptations and then vote on which one you like best, I suppose, on that scene. And let's see, what else? Okay, so I said I would catch you up to speed if you hadn't yet if you had missed out on the previous Jane Eyre read. So here we go. So Jane, orphan, grew up in a school, very strict place. However, since she's very like emotional and she tends to be like very, tempestuous in a way, this educational system actually helped her to tone things down a little. And now she became a teacher at that same school, and then later on she decided to strike out into the world and become a governess and see the world and all the people. So she does so. She takes the post of governess to Adele, who is a ward of Mr Rochester, and she goes to live at Thornfield Hall. Now Thornfield Hall has many it's like it has some mysteries, but the most interesting thing for Jane is actually the master, because it turns out that after an initially rough demeanor, and he was kind of cold, kind of haughty, he turned out to be, like quite like friendly after once they got to talking. And so Jane, who has never really been out in the world and who definitely has never really talked to men, like literally, like she grew up in a house with kids and her aunt, and then she was sent to a girls' school where there was only one superintendent who was evil, Brocklehurst, or one, not superintendent, but like an overseer. So anyway, she never really conversed with men. So this is the first man that she's able to talk to, and it turns out that he has traveled a lot, and yeah, he has like some bitterness inside him, and he definitely has done something that still haunts him to this day. Who knows what kind of crime it is? At this point, we're willing to think he's a criminal. Now it's, I just thought of Barney. He was all the scoundrelous things he could do. He had done it supposedly. So we don't know what Rochester's done, but something happened in the past. He blames fate for it, but he also says that he's to blame for having continued on the wrong path. So he wants like to reform in a way, or he wants to return to being like a good person. But there's something keeping him from it. We don't know what it is. Anyway, so after one of these tete-a-tetes, a talk with Jane where, he's disclosed about his past. We know quite a bit about his past. She is she's woken up by a strange laugh, and it's really frightening to her. And she's like, okay, I'm gonna go back to sleep because I think it's past. But then she hears more sounds, so she goes out into the hallway. It's at night, everybody's asleep, it's late, and she follows a trail of light and smoke. Turns out that there's a fire, and somebody set fire to Mr. Rochester's bed, and he's sleeping. And if she hadn't come in to save him and put out the fire, he would have died there, and probably the whole house would have burned down. So the fire was lit intentionally because she heard somebody about before it happened. So we don't know what happened, but that's not the important thing apparently, because at the end of the chapter she is thinking more about, not about the mysteries and a possibly homicidal arsonist in the house, but she's thinking about Rochester and the things he said to her, because he let the mask slip a little, and it seems that he thinks of her as somebody special. So Jane is like, yo, like she got all these feelings stirred up inside, and I was trying to avoid it, but no. She has fallen for Mr. Rochester. I don't know why. Every single time, you guys, that I read a book, and I've reread a book, especially like books like this, when we know that something is just not to be careful, I always hope that it doesn't happen, but I'm like, please, Jane, don't fall for him. Don't fall for him. And then I get surprised when she does fall for him, as if it was like the very first time I read the book. Kind of silly, but what are you gonna do? That's the nature of reading these kind of books. All right, everybody. So I think I caught you up. I think that was rather a long TLDR, but what are you gonna do? It is. I think it's good time to start reading. We are reading today, chapter 16. Stupid Roman numerals. Chapter 16. I wanted to do chapter 17, but it's a rather long one, so we'll see. Depends on how far along I get into chapter 16 and what time we finish it. If we do finish it in time, I'll read it, but otherwise we'll just have to save it for Wednesday. All right. With that in mind, let's get this started and read some Jane Eyre. Okay. I both wished and feared to see Mr. Rochester on the day which followed this sleepless night. I wanted to hear his voice again, yet feared to meet his eye. During the early part of the morning, I momentarily expected his coming. He was not in the frequent habit of entering the schoolroom, but he did step in for a few minutes sometimes, and I had the impression that he was sure to visit it that day. But the morning passed just as usual. Nothing happened to interrupt the quiet course of Adele's studies. Only soon after breakfast, I heard some bustle in the neighborhood of Mr. Rochester's chamber. Mrs. Fairfax's voice, and Leah's, and the cook's, that is, John's wife, and even John's own gruff tones. There were exclamations of, "What a mercy master was not burnt in his bed! It is always dangerous to keep a candle lit at night. How providential that he had the presence of mind to think of the water jug! I wonder he waked nobody. It is to be hoped he will not take cold when sleeping on the sofa," etc. Too much confabulation succeeded a sound of scrubbing and setting to rights, and when I passed the room in going downstairs to dinner, I saw through the open door that all was again restored to complete order. Only the bed was stripped of its hangings. Leah stood up in the window seat, rubbing the panes of glass dimmed with smoke. I was about to address her, for I wished to know what account had been given of the affair, but on advancing, I saw a second person in the chamber, a woman sitting on a chair by the bedside and sewing rings to new curtains. That woman was no other than Grace Poole. There she sat, staid and taciturn-looking as usual, in her brown stuff gown, her check apron, white handkerchief, and cap. She was intent on her work, in which her whole thoughts seemed absorbed. On her hard forehead and in her commonplace features was nothing either of the paleness or desperation one would have expected to see marking the countenance of a woman who had attempted murder, and whose intended victim had followed her last night to her lair and, as I believed, charged her with the crime she wished to perpetrate. I was amazed, confounded. She looked up, while I still gazed at her. No start, no increase or failure of color betrayed emotion, consciousness of guilt, or fear of detection. She said, "Good morning, miss," in her usual phlegmatic and brief manner, and taking up another ring and more tape, went on with her sewing. I will put her to some test, thought I. Such absolute impenetrability is past comprehension. "Good morning, Grace," I said. "Has anything happened here? I thought I heard the servants all talking together a while ago." Only master had been reading in his bed last night. He fell asleep with his candle lit, and the curtains got on fire. But fortunately he awoke before the bedclothes or the woodwork caught, and contrived to quench the flames with the water in the ewer. "A strange affair," I said, in a low voice then, looking at her fixedly. "Did Mr. Rochester wake nobody? Did no one hear him move?" She again raised her eyes to me, and this time there was something of consciousness in her expression. She seemed to examine me warily. Then she answered, "The servants sleep so far off, miss, they would not be likely to hear. Mrs. Fairfax's room and yours are the nearest to the master's, but Mrs. Fairfax said she heard nothing. When people get elderly, they often sleep heavy." She paused and then added, with a sort of assumed indifference, but still in a marked and significant tone, "But you are young, miss, and I should say a light sleeper. Perhaps you may have heard a noise?" "I did," said I, dropping my voice so that Leah, who was still polishing the panes, could not hear me. "And at first I thought it was Pilot, but Pilot cannot laugh, and I am certain I heard a laugh, and a strange one." She took a new needleful of thread, waxed it carefully, threaded her needle with a steady hand, and then observed with perfect composure, "It is hardly likely the master would laugh, I should think, miss, when he was in such danger. You must have been dreaming." "I was not dreaming," I said with some warmth, for her brazen coolness provoked me. Again she looked at me, and with the same scrutinizing and conscious eye. "Have you told master that you heard a laugh?" she inquired. "I have not had the opportunity of speaking to him this morning." "You did not think of opening your door and looking out into the gallery?" she further asked. She appeared to be cross-questioning me, attempting to draw from me information unawares. The idea struck me that if she discovered I knew or suspected her guilt, she would be playing of some of her malignant pranks on me. I thought it advisable to be on my guard. On the contrary, I bolted my door. Then you're not in the habit of bolting your door every night before you get into bed? Fiend! She wants to know my habits, that she may lay her plans accordingly. Indignation again prevailed over prudence. I replied sharply, Hitherto, I have often omitted to fasten the bolt. I did not think it necessary. I was not aware any danger or annoyance was to be dreaded at Thornfield Hall. But in the future, I shall take good care to make all secure before I venture to lie down. It will be wise to do so, was her answer. This neighborhood is as quiet as any I know, and I never heard of the hall being attempted by robbers since it was a house. But there are hundreds of pounds' worth of plate in the plate closet, as it is well known. As you see, for such a large house, there are very few servants, because master has never lived here much, and when he does come, being a bachelor, he needs little waiting on. But I always think it best to err on the safe side. A door is soon fastened, and it is well to have a drawn bolt between one and any mischief that may be about. A deal of people, miss, are for trusting all to Providence, but I say Providence will not dispense with the means, though he often blesses them when they are used discreetly. And here she closed her harangue, a long one for her, and uttered with the demureness of a Quakeress. I still stood absolutely dumbfounded at what appeared to me her miraculous self-possession and most inscrutable hypocrisy, when the cook entered. Miss Poole, said she, addressing Grace, the servants' dinner will soon be ready. Will you come down? No, just put my pint of porter and a bit of pudding on a tray, and I'll carry it upstairs. You'll have some meat, just a morsel, and a taste of cheese, that's all. And the sago. The sago, I've always wondered. Edible starch which is obtained from a palm and is the staple food in parts of the tropics. Huh. Interesting. I have never heard of that. And the sago. Never mind it at present. I shall be coming down before tea time. I'll make it myself. The cook here turned to me, saying that Mrs. Fairfax was waiting for me, so I departed. I hardly heard Mrs. Fairfax's account of the curtain conflagration during dinner. So much was I occupied in puzzling my brains over the enigmatical character of Grace Poole, and still more in pondering the problem of her position at Thornfield, and questioning why she had not been given into custody that morning, or at the very least dismissed from her master's service. He had almost as much as declared his conviction of her criminality last night. What mysterious cause withheld him from accusing her? Why had he enjoined me, too, to secrecy? It was strange. A bold, vindictive, and haughty gentleman seemed somehow in the power of one of the meanest of his dependents, so much in her power that even when she lifted her hand against his life, he dared not openly charge her with the attempt, much less punish her for it. Had Grace been young and handsome, I would have been tempted to think that tenderer feelings than prudence or fear influenced Mr. Rochester in her behalf. But, wait a second, isn't Grace supposed to be like in her 30s? She's no longer young, you guys. According to 18-year-old Jane. Ah, man. Yet, I reflected, she has been young. Right, she has been young once. Yet, I reflected, she has been young once. Her youth would be contemporary with her master's. Mrs. Fairfax told me she had lived here many years. I don't think she can ever have been pretty, but for aught I know, she may possess originality and strength of character to compensate for the want of personal advantages. Mr. Rochester is an amateur of the decided and eccentric. Grace is eccentric at least. What if a former caprice, A freak very possible to a nature so sudden and headstrong as his, has delivered him into her power, and she now exercises over his actions a secret influence, the result of his own indiscretion, which he cannot shake off and dare not disregard. Wow. Imagine that. Jane. Don't go about thinking these things, Jane. But having reached this point of conjecture, Mrs. Poole's square, flat figure and uncomely, dry, even coarse face reoccurred so distinctly to my mind's eye that I thought, no, impossible. My supposition cannot be correct. Yet, suggested the secret voice which talked to us in our own hearts, yet you are not beautiful either, and perhaps Mr. Rochester approves of you. At any rate, you have often felt as if he did. And last night, remember his words, remember his look, remember his voice. I well remembered all. Language, glance, and tone seemed at the moment vividly renewed. I was now in the schoolroom. Adele was drawing, and I bent over her and directed her pencil. She looked up with a sort of start. "Qu'avez-vous, mademoiselle?" said she. "Why don't tremblant comme la fille?" Today it's too early for me to try to read it out loud. "What is it, mademoiselle? Your fingers are quivering and your cheeks are red, red like cherries." "Why don't tremblant comme la fille? Elle vos joues sont rouges, mais rouges comme des cerises." "I am hot, Adele, with stooping." She went on sketching. I went on thinking. I hastened to drive from my mind the hateful notion I had been conceiving respecting Grace Poole. It disgusted me. I compared myself with her and found we were quite different. Bessie Leaven said I was quite a lady, and she spoke truth. I was a lady, and now I looked much better than I did when Bessie saw me. I had more color and more flesh, more life, more vivacity, because I had brighter hopes and keener enjoyments. "Evening approaches," said I as I looked toward the window. I have never heard Mr. Rochester's voice or step in the house today, but surely I shall see him before night. I feared the meeting in the morning. Now I desire it, because expectation has been so long baffled that it has grown impatient. When dusk actually closed, and when Adele left me to go and play in the nursery with Sophie, I did most keenly desire it. I listened for the bell to ring below. I listened for Leah coming up with a message. I fancied sometimes I heard Mr. Rochester's own tread, and I turned to the door, expecting it to open and admit him. The door remained shut. Darkness only came in through the window. Still, it was not late. He often sent for me at 7 and 8 o'clock, and it was yet but 6. Surely I should not be wholly disappointed tonight when I had so many things to say to him. I wanted again to introduce the subject of Grace Poole and to hear what he would answer. I wanted to ask him plainly if he really believed it was she who had made last night's hideous attempt, and if so, why he kept her wickedness a secret. It little mattered whether my curiosity irritated him. I knew the pleasure of vexing and soothing him by turns. It was one I chiefly delighted in, and a sure instinct always prevented me from going too far. Beyond the verge of provocation I never ventured. On the extreme brink I liked well to try my skill. Retaining every minute retaining every minute form of respect, every propriety of my station, I could still meet him in argument without fear or uneasy restraint. This suited both him and me. A tread creaked on the stairs at last. Leah made her appearance, but it was only to intimate that tea was ready in Mrs. Fairfax's room. Thither I repaired, glad at least to go downstairs, for that brought me, I imagined, nearer to Mr. Rochester's presence. "You must want your tea," said the good lady as I joined her. "You ate so little at dinner, I'm afraid," she continued. "You're not well today. You look quite flushed and feverish." "Oh, quite well. I never felt better." "Then you must prove it by evincing a good appetite. Will you fill the teapot while I knit off this needle?" Having completed her task, she rose to draw down the blind, which she had hitherto kept up, by way, I suppose, of making the most of daylight, though dusk was now fast deepening into total obscurity. "It is fair to-night," said she, as she looked through the panes, "though not starlight. Mr. Rochester has, on the whole, had a favourable day for his journey." "Journey? Is Mr. Rochester gone anywhere? I did not know he was out." "Oh, he set off the moment he had breakfasted. He is gone to the Leas, Mr. Eshton's place, 10 miles on the other side of Millcote. I believe there is quite a party assembled there. Lord Ingram, Sir George Lynn, Colonel Dent, and others." "Do you expect him back tonight?" "No, nor tomorrow either. I should say he is very likely to stay a week or more. When these fine fashionable people get together, they are so surrounded by elegance and gaiety, so well provided with all that can please and entertain, they are in no hurry to separate. Gentlemen, especially, are often in request in such occasions, and Mr. Rochester is so talented and so lively in society that I believe he's the general favourite. The ladies are very fond of him, though you would not think his appearance calculated to recommend him particularly in their eyes. But I suppose his acquirements and abilities, perhaps his wealth and good blood, make amends for any little fault of look." "Are there ladies at the Leas?" There are Mrs. Eshton and her 3 daughters, very elegant young ladies indeed, and there are the Honourable Blanche and Mary Ingram, most beautiful women, I suppose. Indeed, I have seen Blanche 6 or 7 years since, when she was a girl of 18. She came here to a Christmas ball and party Mr. Rochester gave. You should have seen the dining room that day. How richly it was decorated, how brilliantly lit up. I should think there were 50 ladies and gentlemen present, all of the first country families, and Miss Ingram was considered the belle of the evening." "You saw her, you say, Mrs. Fairfax? What was she like?" "Yes, I saw her. The dining-room doors were thrown open, and as it was Christmas time, the servants were allowed to assemble in the hall, to hear some of the ladies sing and play. Mr. Rochester would have me to come in, and I sat down in a quiet corner and watched them. I never saw a more splendid scene. The ladies were magnificently dressed. Most of them, at least most of the younger ones, looked handsome, but Miss Ingram was certainly the queen." "And what was she like?" "Tall, fine bust, sloping shoulders, long graceful neck, olive complexion, dark and clear, noble features, and eyes rather like Mr. Rochester's, large and black, and as brilliant as her jewels. And then she had such a fine head of hair, raven black and so becomingly arranged, a crown of thick plaits behind, and in front the longest and the glossiest curls I ever saw. She was dressed in pure white. An amber-colored scarf was passed over her shoulder and across her breast, tied at her side and descending in long fringed ends below her knee. She wore an amber-colored flower, too, in her hair. It contrasted well with the jetty mass of her curls." "She was greatly admired, of course?" "Oh, yes, indeed, and not only for her beauty but her accomplishments. She was one of the ladies who sang. A gentleman accompanied her on the piano. She and Mr. Rochester sang a duet." "Mr. Rochester? I was not aware he could sing." "Oh, he has a fine bass voice and an excellent taste for music." "And Miss Ingram? What sort of a voice had she?" "Oh, a very rich and powerful one. She sang delightfully. It was a treat to listen to her, and she played afterwards. I am not a judge of music, but Mr. Rochester's is, and I heard him say her execution was remarkably good." "And this beautiful and accomplished lady, she's not yet married?" "It appears not. I fancy neither she nor her sisters have a very large fortune. Old Lord Ingram's estates were chiefly entailed, and the eldest son came in for everything almost." "But I wonder no wealthy nobleman or gentleman has taken a fancy to her. Mr. Rochester, for instance. He is rich, is he not?" "Oh, yes, but You see, there is a considerable difference in age. Mr. Rochester is nearly 40. She is but 25. What of that? More unequal matches are made every day. True, yet I should scarcely fancy Mr. Rochester would entertain an idea of the sort. But you eat nothing. You have scarcely tasted since you began tea. No, I am too thirsty to eat. Would you let me have another cup? I was about again to revert to the probability of a union between Mr. Rochester and the beautiful Blanche. Why are you doing this to yourself, Jane, by the way? But Adele came in, and the conversation was turned into another channel. When once more I reviewed the information I had got, I looked into my heart, examined its thoughts and feelings, and endeavored to bring back with a strict hand such as had been straying through the imagination's boundless and trackless waste, into the safe fold of common sense. Arraigned at my own bar, memory having given evidence of the hopes, wishes, sentiments I had been cherishing since last night, of the general state of mind in which I had indulged for nearly a fortnight past, reason having come forward and told, in her own quiet way, a plain, unvarnished tale, showing how I had rejected the real and rabidly devoured the ideal, I pronounced judgment to this effect: that a greater fool than Jane Eyre had never breathed the breath of life, that a more fantastic idiot had never surfeited herself on sweet lies and swallowed poison as if it were nectar. You, I said, a favorite of Mr. Rochester, you, gifted with the power of pleasing him, you, important to him in any way, go, your folly sickens me. You have derived pleasure from occasional tokens of preference, equivocal tokens shown by a gentleman of family and a man of the world to a dependent and a novice. How dared you, poor stupid dupe? Could not even self-interest make you wiser? You repeated to yourself this morning the brief scene of last night? Cover your face and be ashamed. He said something in praise of your eyes, did he? Blind puppy, open their bleared lids and look on your own accursed senselessness. It does good to no woman to be flattered by her superior, who cannot possibly intend to marry her. And it is madness in all women to let a secret love kindle within them, which, if unreturned and unknown, must devour the life that feeds it, and if discovered and responded to, must lead, ignis fatuus-like, into miry wilds whence there is no extrication. Listen then, Jane Eyre, to your sentence. Tomorrow, place the glass before you, and draw in chalk your own picture, faithfully, without softening one defect. Omit no harsh line, smooth away no displeasing irregularity. Write under it, portrait of a governess, disconnected, poor, and plain. Oh my gosh, Jane, don't do this to yourself. Actually, probably yes, do this to yourself. If this is what you need, Jane, to get yourself back in order, do what you need to do. But man, this is harsh. Afterwards, take a piece of smooth ivory. You have one prepared in your drawing box. Take your palette, mix your freshest, finest, clearest tints. Choose your most delicate camel hair pencils. Delineate carefully the loveliest face you can imagine. Paint it in your softest shades and sweetest lines, according to a description given by Mrs. Fairfax of Blanche Ingram. Remember the raven ringlets, the oriental eye. What? You revert to Mr. Rochester as a model? Order! No snivel, no sentiment, no regret. I will endure only sense and resolution. Recall the august yet harmonious lineaments, the Grecian neck and bust. Let the round and dazzling arm be visible, and the delicate hand. Omit neither diamond ring nor gold bracelet. Portray faithfully the attire: aerial lace and glistening satin, graceful scarf and golden rose. Call it Blanche, an accomplished lady of rank. Whenever in the future you should chance to fancy Mr. Rochester thinks well of you, take out these two pictures and compare them. Say, Mr. Rochester might probably win that noble lady's love, if he chose to strive for it. Is it likely he would waste a serious thought on this indigent and insignificant plebeian? Oh my goodness, Jane! Okay, that's an exercise she has to do. Okay, fine. I'll do it, I resolved, and having framed this determination, I grew calm and fell asleep. I kept my word. An hour or two sufficed to sketch my own portrait in crayons. And in less than 2 weeks, you guys, took her 2 hours to do her portrait, and a little under 2 weeks, you guys, to complete Blanche Ingram's. And in less than a fortnight, I had completed an ivory miniature of an imaginary Blanche Ingram. It looked a lovely face enough, and when compared with the real head in chalk, the contrast was as great as self-control could desire. I derived benefit from the task. I had kept my head and hands employed, and had given force and fixedness to the new impressions I had wished to stamp indelibly on my heart. Ere long, I had reason to congratulate myself on the course of wholesome discipline to which I had thus forced my feelings to submit. Thanks to it, I was able to meet subsequent occurrences with a decent calm which, had they found me unprepared, I should probably have been unequal to maintain, even externally. End of chapter. So, Jane realizes that her love, her attachment, her fixation for Rochester is absolutely impossible. It's just not the thing. First of all, she's his governess. She is poor, and compared to all the other noble women that might be his acquaintance, she doesn't really stand a chance. So she says, and she says, like, okay, so yeah, I saw a little bit of partiality on his side. He said some things about me which kind of gave me the wrong idea, but no, I would be a fool to be led astray by these things. So she's like, she took herself to court at her own arraignment. And you know what? When I was reading this, it reminded me so much of Kaguya. Have you guys, watched Kaguya, the movie? Where all of the Kaguyas sit in a trial because of their behavior, and it's a hilarious scene. So yeah, it reminded me of that. Just Jane at her own trial, and of course, Reason is the one that's suing Jane. Reason is the one that has to like prevail, and that's what happens. Jane decides that she would be a fool to let her emotions make her do or think things that just fantasies. So she decides to train her mind, and it says at the end of the chapter that she's happy that in the end she did this because of things that were going to happen soon, that would test her. So do we want to see what those things are, you guys? Should we just go into the next chapter? It is, you know what? I don't know. Let's see. That was 17. The next chapter is it's more than twice as long as this one. So I could probably do a bit, but I don't think it'll... Do you guys want to see Mr. Rochester? What do you guys want to do? I'm thinking about it. Might as well just do it. I still have plenty of water. Okay, so let me say hello to people that have joined in since I started reading. We have Dread Tempest says good morning, and in case I don't see it, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. Yeah, the Truman Show. And Red Tempest says we'll have to catch the rewatch to see what happens. Bye, everyone. Thank you for checking in, Red Tempest. Hope you're doing well. And enjoy the rewatch. And then we also have Block Shroud. Says most people set the term old to be 13 years older than themselves. Yeah, I suppose so, but me being around Grace Poole's age, I'm sure. like I felt like a knife to my heart when she said that she used to be young. Yeah, I know. So, I mean, it's funny though because like in part of my job is to mentor younger kids. Like I call them kids, so I guess it's the same thing, but they're like college age. So, and they would consider me to be like around the same age as their parents, which I'm like, yo, no. But being a mentor figure, I guess, that comes with the job. Um, but yeah, in the same way, I look at college age adults and I think, and because I work with them or whatever, I think in my head they're kids. So it's a mental thing. So I don't blame them. I bet they want. I wouldn't blame somebody college age to think that I'm old, just because I think of college age people as kids. In fact, yeah, I that's why, like, personally I would never date anybody who's like in college age. Yes, it's legal, but no, it's wrong. And I don't see how men in this world can date college age kids, you know? like a 30 something year old and a college girl. It's like wrong. But I still don't like the fact that I can no longer be young. But you know, at least I did good in my youth. Well, anyway. So now you guys know what I think about things. Why is this rambling? Okay, so while I was rambling about this, gosh, I wish I could just go back and delete this part. I'm just thinking to myself. Let's just read the next chapter, see where it takes us, and then yeah, it's a good one. If you guys are wondering about Mr. Rochester and what's happening to him, well, we're gonna see him again soon. Let's do this. A week passed, and no news arrived of Mr. Rochester. 10 days, and still he did not come. Mrs. Fairfax said she would not be surprised if he were to go straight from the Leas to London, and thence to the Continent, and not show his face again at Thornfield for a year to come. He had not unfrequently quitted it in a manner quite as abrupt and unexpected. When I heard this, I was beginning to feel a strange chill and failing at the heart. I was actually permitting myself to experience a sickening sense of disappointment, but rallying my wits and recollecting my principles, I at once called my sensations to order, and it was wonderful how I got over the temporary blunder, how I cleared up this mistake of supposing Mr. Rochester's movements a matter in which I had any cause to take a vital interest. Not that I humbled myself by a slavish notion of inferiority. On the contrary, I just said, "You have nothing to do with the master of Thornfield, further than to receive the salary he gives you for teaching his protégé, and to be grateful for such respectful and kind treatment as, if you do your duty, you have a right to expect at his hands. Be sure that that is the only tie he seriously acknowledges between you and him. So, don't make him the object of your fine feelings, your raptures, agonies, and so forth. He is not of your order. Keep to your caste, and be too self-respecting to lavish the love of the whole heart, soul, and strength, where such a gift is not wanted and would be despised." I went on with my day's business tranquilly, but ever and anon vague suggestions kept wandering across my brain of reasons why I should quit Thornfield, and I kept involuntarily framing advertisements and pondering conjectures about new situations. These thoughts I did not think to check. They might germinate and bear fruit if they could. Mr. Rochester had been absent upwards of a fortnight, when the post brought Mrs. Fairfax a letter. "It is from the master," said she, and she looked at the direction. "Now, I suppose we shall know whether we are to expect his return or not." And while she broke the seal and perused the document, I went on to take my coffee. We were at breakfast. It was hot, and I attributed to that circumstance a fiery glow which suddenly rose to my face. Why my hand shook, and why I involuntarily spilt half the contents of my cup into my saucer, I did not choose to consider. Oh, wait, hold on a second. why my hand shook, and why I involuntarily spilled half the contents of my cup into my saucer, I did not wish to consider. Well, I sometimes think we're too quiet, but we run the chance of being busy enough now, for a little while at least, said Mrs. Fairfax, still holding the note before her spectacles. Ere I permitted myself to request an explanation, I tied the string of Adele's pinafore, which happened to be loose. Having helped her also to another bun and refilled her mug of milk, I said nonchalantly, "Mr. Rochester is not likely to return soon, I suppose?" "Indeed he is. In 3 days, he says. That will be next Thursday, and not alone either. I don't know how many of the fine people at the Leas are coming with him. He sends directions for all the best rooms to be prepared, and the library and drawing rooms are to be cleaned out. I'm to get more kitchen hands from the George Inn at Millcote, and from wherever else I can, and the ladies will bring their maids, and gentlemen their valets. So we shall have a full house of it." And Mrs. Fairfax swallowed her breakfast and hastened away to commence operations. The 3 days were, as she had foretold, busy enough. I had thought all the rooms at Thornfield beautifully clean and well arranged, but it appears I was mistaken. 3 women were got to help, and such scrubbing, such brushing, such washing of paint and beating of carpets, such taking down and putting up of pictures, such polishing of mirrors and lustres, such lighting of fires in bedrooms, such airing of sheets and feather beds on hearths, I never beheld, either before or since. Adele ran quite wild in the midst of it. The preparations for company and prospect of their arrival seemed to throw her into ecstasies. She would have Sophie to look over all her toilettes, as she called her frocks, to furbish up any that were passés, and to air and arrange the new. For herself, she did nothing but caper about in the front chambers, jump on and off the bedsteads, and lie on the mattresses and piled up bolsters and pillows before the enormous fires roaring in the chimneys. From school duties she was exonerated. Mrs. Fairfax had pressed me into her service, and I was all day in the storeroom, helping, or hindering, her and the cook, learning to make custards and cheesecakes and French pastry, to truss game and garnish dessert dishes. The party were expected to arrive on Thursday afternoon, in time for dinner at 6. During the intervening period, I had no time to nurse chimeras, and I believe I was active and gay as anybody, Adele excepted. Still, now and then, I received a dampening check to my cheerfulness, and was, in spite of myself, thrown back on the region of doubts and portents and dark conjectures. This was when I chanced to see the third-story staircase door, which of late had always been kept locked, open slowly, and give passage to the form of Grace Poole, in prim cap, white apron, and handkerchief. When I watched her glide along the gallery, her quiet tread muffled in a list slipper, when I saw her look into the bustling, topsy-turvy bedrooms, just say a word perhaps to the charwoman about the proper way to polish a grate, or clean a marble mantelpiece, or take stains from papered walls, and then pass on. She would thus descend to the kitchen once a day, eat her dinner, smoke a moderate pipe on the hearth, and go back, carrying her pot of porter with her, for her private solace, in her own gloomy upper haunt. Only 1 hour in the 24 did she pass with her fellow servants below. All the rest of her time was spent in some low-ceilinged oaken chamber of the second story. There she sat and sewed, and probably laughed drearily to herself, as companionless as a prisoner in his dungeon. The strangest thing of all was that not a soul in the house, except me, noticed her habits, or seemed to marvel at them. No one discussed her position or employment. No one pitied her solitude or isolation. I once indeed overheard part of a dialogue between Leah and one of the charwomen, of which Grace formed the subject. Leah had been saying something I had not caught, and the charwoman remarked, "She gets good wages, I guess." "Yes," said Leah, "I wish I had as good. Not that mine are to complain of. There's no stinginess at Thornfield. But they're now 1/5 of the sum Mrs. Poole receives, and she is laying by. She goes every quarter to the bank at Millcote. I shouldn't wonder, but she has saved enough to keep her independent if she'd like to leave, but I suppose she's got used to the place. And then she's not 40 yet, and is strong and able for anything. It is too soon for her to give up this business. She's a good hand, I dare say, said the charwoman. Ah, she understands what she has to do. Nobody better, rejoined Leah significantly. And it's not everyone who could fill her shoes, not for all the money she gets. That is not, was the reply. I wonder what the master. The charwoman was going on, but here Leah turned and perceived me, and she instantly gave her companion a nudge. Doesn't she know? I heard the woman whisper. Leah shook her head, and the conversation was, of course, dropped. All I had gathered from it amounted to this, that there was a mystery at Thornfield, and that from participation in that mystery I was purposely excluded. Water break. Let's see. Going back to the comments, Blockshot says, dose of reality. Why is there a 12-year-old cashier? Oh, wait, these kids are 18 years now, right? By the way, lately, though, I've seen that a lot of kids, like teens, they look like they're adults, and it's because their makeup is so on point. Like, their makeup is so good. I have to admire their makeup skills. Yeah, Blockshot says, at least it's not infuriating when my 6-year-old niece calls me old. Oh, I feel that to my soul. Oh, Blockshot, I feel you. Cheers to you. And yes, you point out something. So much to prepare, so little staff, and so little time. I know. Again, this is Rochester being a man. He has no idea what it takes to keep a house, to prepare a house for guests, especially with so few details. We don't know how many people in total are coming. We don't know much. So they have to prepare for anything. That's why Mrs. Fairfax was very, very really needed all hands on deck, and Adele was, she had a holiday. By the way, I love how accurate she describes Adele's enthusiasm and excitement. Because if I had been a child also, like in the middle of all this, I would also have been jumping on the beds and going into all the rooms. And then if I saw like a huge pile of pillows and stuff by the fire, I would have like jumped on in and just like laid there and played around there. Yeah, so accurate. But anyway, we have a mystery confirmed. Jane now knows that there's something going on and she is being purposely kept from it. Wonder what it is. And yes, Grace Poole is in the middle of it. Thursday came. All work had been completed the previous evening. Carpets were laid down, bed hangings festooned, radiant white counterpanes spread, toilet tables arranged, furniture rubbed, flowers piled in vases. Both chambers and saloons looked as fresh and bright as hands could make them. The hall, too, was scoured, and the great carved clock, as well as the steps and banisters of the staircase, were polished to the brightness of glass. In the dining room, the sideboard flashed resplendent with plate. In the drawing room and boudoir, vases of exotics bloomed on all sides. Afternoon arrived. Mrs. Fairfax assumed her best black satin gown, her gloves, and her gold watch, for it was her part to receive the company, to conduct the ladies to their rooms, etc. Adele, too, would be dressed, though I thought she had little chance of being introduced to the party that day at least. However, to please her, I allowed Sophie to apparel her in one of her short, full muslin frocks. For myself, I had no need to make any change. I should not be called upon to quit my sanctum of the schoolroom, for a sanctum it was now become to me, a very pleasant refuge in time of trouble. It had been a mild, serene spring day, one of those days which, towards the end of March or the beginning of April, rise shining over the earth as heralds of summer. It was drawing to an end now, but the evening was even warm, and I sat at work in the schoolroom with the window open. It gets late, said Mrs. Fairfax, entering in rustling state. I am glad I ordered dinner an hour after the time Mr. Rochester mentioned, for it is past 6 now. I've sent John to the gates to see if there's anything on the road. One can see a long way from thence in the direction of Milket." She went to the window. "Here he is," said she. "Well, John." "What?" she said, leaning out. "Any news?" "They're coming, ma'am," was the only answer. "They'll be here in 10 minutes." Adele flew to the window. I followed, taking care to stand on one side so that, screened by the curtain, I could see without being seen. The 10 minutes, John, had seemed very long, but at last wheels were heard. 4 equestrians galloped up the drive, and after them came 2 open carriages. Fluttering veils and waving plumes filled the vehicles. 2 of the cavaliers were young, dashing-looking gentlemen. The third was Mr. Rochester on his black horse, Mesrour, Pilot bounding before him, and at his side rode a lady, and he and she were the first of the party. Her purple riding habit almost swept the ground. Her veil streamed long on the breeze, mingling with its transparent folds, and gleaming through them shone rich raven ringlets. "Miss Ingram!" exclaimed Mrs. Fairfax, and away she hurried to her post below. The cavalcade, following the sweep of the drive, quickly turned the angle of the house, and I lost sight of it. Adele now petitioned to go down, but I took her on my knee and gave her to understand that she must not on any account think of venturing in sight of the ladies, either now or at any other time, unless expressly sent for, that Mr. Rochester would be very angry, etc. Some natural tears were shed on being told this, but as I began to look very grave, she consented at last to wipe them. A joyous stir was now audible. A joyous stir was now audible in the hall. Gentlemen's deep tones and ladies' silvery accents blent harmoniously together, and distinguishable above all, though not loud, was the sonorous voice of the master of Thornfield Hall, welcoming his fair and gallant guests under its roof. Then light steps ascended the stairs, and there was a tripping through the gallery, and soft cheerful laughs, an opening and closing of doors, and for a time a hush. "Il changeant les toilettes," said Adele, who, listening attentively, had followed every movement, and she sighed. "Chez maman, quand il y avait du monde, je les suivais partout, au salon et leur chambre. Souvent je regarde les femmes." Okay, she says the first one, they're changing, yes, and then the second one, she said, "At Mamma's, when people came, I followed them everywhere to the drawing rooms and the bedrooms. Often I watched the maids dress the ladies and arrange their hair, and it was so much fun. That's the way one learns." "Don't you feel hungry, Adele?" "Mais oui, mademoiselle. Voilà 5 ou 6 heures que nous n'avons pas mangé." Yes, mademoiselle, we haven't eaten for 5 or 6 hours." "Well now, while the ladies are in their rooms, I will venture down and get you something to eat." And issuing from my asylum with precaution, I sought a back stairs which conducted directly to the kitchen. All in that region was fire and commotion. The soup and fish were in the last stage of projection, and the cook hung over her crucibles in a frame of mind and body threatening spontaneous combustion. In the servants' hall, 2 coachmen and 3 gentlemen's gentlemen stood or sat round the fire. The Abigails, I suppose, were upstairs with their mistresses. The new servants, that had been hired from Milket, were bustling about everywhere. Threading this chaos, I at last reached the larder, where I took possession of a cold chicken, a roll of bread, some tarts, a plate or 2, and a knife and fork. With this booty I made a hasty retreat. I had regained the gallery, and was just shutting the back door behind me, when an accelerated hum warned me that the ladies were about to issue from their chambers. I could not proceed to the schoolroom without passing some of their doors, and running the risk of being surprised with my cargo of, of victuals, my cargo of victuallage. So I stood still at this end, which, being windowless, was dark, quite dark now, for the sun was set and twilight gathering. Presently the chambers gave up their fair tenants one after another. Each came out gaily and airily, with dress that gleamed lustrous through the dusk. For a moment they stood grouped together at the other extremity of the gallery, conversing in a key of sweet, subdued vivacity. They then descended the staircase almost as noiselessly as bright mist rolls down a hill. Their collective appearance had left on me an impression of high-born elegance, such as I had never before received. I found Adele peeping through the schoolroom door, which she held ajar. "What beautiful ladies!" cried she in English. "Oh, I wish I may go to them. Do you think Mr. Rochester will send for us by and by after dinner?" "No, indeed, I don't. Mr. Rochester has something else to think about. Never mind the ladies tonight. Perhaps he will see them tomorrow. Here's your dinner." She was really hungry, so the chicken and tarts served to divert her attention for a time. It was well I secured this forage, for both she and I, and Sophie, to whom I conveyed a share of our repast, would have run a chance of getting no dinner at all. Everyone downstairs was much too engaged to think of us. The dessert was not carried out till after 9, and at 10 footmen were still running to and fro with trays and coffee cups. I allowed Adele to sit up much later than usual, for she declared she could not possibly go to sleep while the doors kept opening and shutting below, and people bustling about. Besides, she added, a message might possibly come from Mr. Rochester when she was undressed. Et alors, quel dommage! And then what a pity. Where is that? And then too bad. I think that was it. No? Oh yeah, and then what a shame that would be. I told her stories as long as she would listen to them, and then, for a chance, I took her out into the gallery. The hall lamp was now lit, and it amused her to look over the balustrade and watch the servants passing backwards and forwards. When the evening was far advanced, a sound of music issued from the drawing-room, whither the piano had been removed. Adele and I sat down on the top step of the stairs to listen. Presently, a voice blent with rich tones of the instrument. There was a lady who sang, and very sweet her notes were. The solo over, a duet followed, and then a glee. A joyous conversational murmur filled up the intervals. I listened along. Suddenly, I discovered that my ear was wholly intent on analyzing the mingled sounds and trying to discriminate amidst the confusion the accents of those of Mr. Rochester. And when it caught them, which it soon did, it found a further task in framing the tones, rendered by distance inarticulate, into words. The clock struck 11. I looked at Adele, whose head leant against my shoulder. Her eyes were waxing heavy, so I took her up in my arms and carried her off to bed. It was near 1 before the gentlemen and ladies sought their chambers. The next day was as fine as its predecessor. It was devoted by the party to an excursion to some site in the neighborhood. They set out early in the forenoon, some on horseback, the rest in carriages. I witnessed both the departure and the return. Miss Ingram, as before, was the only lady equestrian, and as before, Mr. Rochester galloped at her side. The two rode a little apart from the rest. I pointed this circumstance to Mrs. Fairfax, who was standing at the window with me. "You said she's not likely they should think of getting married," said I. "But you see, Mr. Rochester evidently prefers her to any of the other ladies." "Yes, I dare say. No doubt he admires her. And she him. Look how she leans her head towards him, as if she were conversing confidentially. I wish I could see her face. I have never had a glimpse of it yet." "You will see her this evening," answered Mrs. Fairfax. "I happened to remark to Mr. Rochester how much Adele wished to be introduced to the ladies, and he said, 'Oh, let her come into the drawing-room after dinner, and request Miss Eyre to accompany her.'" "Yes, he said that from mere politeness. I need not go, I am sure," I answered. "Well, I observed to him that as you were unused to company, I did not think you would like appearing before so gay a party, all strangers. And he replied in his quick way, 'Nonsense! If she objects, tell her it is my particular wish, and if she resists, say I shall come and fetch her in case of contumacy.'" "I will not give him that trouble," I answered. "I will go, if no better may be, but I don't like it. Shall you be there, Mrs. Fairfax? No, I pleaded off, and he admitted my plea. I'll tell you how to manage as to not as I'll tell you how to manage so as to avoid the embarrassment of making a formal entrance, which is the most disagreeable part of the business. You must go into the drawing room while it is empty, before the ladies leave the dinner table. Choose your seat in any quiet nook you like. You need not stay long after the gentlemen come in, unless you please. Just let Mr. Rochester see you are there and slip away. Nobody will notice you. Yes, this is the introvert's way. This is the way. This is how you show up your face at a party and then make a quick exit. Arrive early, leave early. Make sure the host sees you. Interact a little if necessary, but then get out of there. So, punctuality. See, these are wise words from Mrs. Fairfax. Mrs. Fairfax is all wisdom. All right. Will these people remain long, do you think? Perhaps 2 or 3 weeks, certainly not more. After the Easter recess, Sir George Lynn, who was lately elected member of Millcote, will have to go to town and take his seat. I dare say Mr. Rochester will accompany him. It surprises me that he has already made so protracted a stay at Netherfield. Did I say Netherfield? Those who know. At Thornfield. It was with some trepidation that I perceived the hour approach when I was to repair with my charge to the drawing-room. Adele had been in a state of ecstasy all day after hearing she was to be presented to the ladies in the evening, and it was not till Sophie commenced the operation of dressing her that she sobered down. Then the importance of the process quickly steadied her, and by the time she had her curls arranged in well-smoothed, drooping clusters, her pink satin frock put on, her long sash tied, and her lace mittens adjusted, she looked as grave as any judge. No need to warn her not to disarrange her attire. When she was dressed, she sat demurely down in her little chair, taking care previously to lift the satin skirt for fear she should crease it, and assured me she would not stir thence till I was ready. This I quickly was. My best dress, the silver grey one, purchased for Miss Temple's wedding and never worn since, was soon put on. My hair was soon smoothed, my sole ornament, the pale brooch, soon assumed. We descended. Fortunately, there was another entrance to the drawing-room than that through the saloon, where they were all seated at dinner. We found the apartment vacant, a large fire burning silently on the marble hearth, and wax candles shining in bright solitude amid the exquisite flowers with which tables were adorned. The crimson curtain hung before the arch. Slight as was the separation this drapery formed from the party in the adjoining saloon, they spoke in so low a key that nothing of their conversation could be distinguished beyond a soothing murmur. Adele, who appeared to be still under the influence of a most solemnizing impression, sat down without a word on the footstool I pointed out to her. I retired to a window seat and, taking a book from a table near, endeavored to read. Adele brought her stool to my feet. Ere long, she touched my knee. What is it, Adele? Est-ce que je ne peux pas prendre un seul de ces fleurs magnifiques, mademoiselle? Seulement pour complémenter ma toilette. She wants a flower to compliment her. Could I but take one of these wonderful flowers, mademoiselle, only to complete my dress? You think too much of your toilette, Adele, but you may have a flower. And I took a rose from a vase and fastened it in her sash. She sighed a sigh of ineffable satisfaction, as if her cup of happiness were now full. I turned my face away to conceal a smile I could not suppress. There was something ludicrous as well as painful in the little Parisienne's earnest and innate devotion to matters of dress. Oops, what happened? Okay. A soft sound of rising now became audible. The curtain was swept back from the arch, though it appeared the dining room, with its lit lustre, pouring down light on the silver and glass of a magnificent dessert table covering a long table. A band of ladies stood in the opening. They entered, and the curtain fell behind them. There were but 8, yet somehow as they flocked in, they gave the impression of a much larger number. Some of them were very tall. Many were dressed in white, and all had sweeping amplitude of array that seemed to magnify their persons as a mist magnifies the moon. I rose and curtsied to them. 1 or 2 bent their heads in return. The others only stared at me. They dispersed about the room, reminding me, by the lightness and buoyancy of their movements, of a flock of white plumy birds. Some of them threw themselves in half-reclining positions on the sofas and ottomans. Some bent over the tables and examined the flowers and books. The rest gathered in a group around the fire. All talked in a low but clear tone, which seemed habitual to them. I knew their names afterwards, and may as well mention them now. First there was Mrs. Eshton and 2 of her daughters. She had evidently been a handsome woman, and was well preserved still. Of her daughters, the eldest, Amy, was rather little, naive and childlike in face and manner, and piquant in form. Her white muslin dress and blue sash became her very well. The second, Louisa, was taller and more elegant in figure, with a very pretty face, of that order the French term minoir chiffonné. Pretty but irregular. Both sisters were fair as lilies. Lady Lynn was a large and stout personage of about 40, very erect, very haughty-looking, richly dressed in a satin robe of changeful sheen. Her dark hair shone glossily under the shade of an azure plume, and within the circlet of a band of gems. Mrs. Coronel Dent was less showy, but I thought more ladylike. She had a slight figure, a pale, gentle face, and fair hair. Her black satin dress, her scarf of rich foreign lace, and her pearl ornaments pleased me better than the rainbow radiance of the titled dame. I bet you that Mrs. Coronel Dent was one of the ladies that actually acknowledged her curtsy with a little nod. The other ones, they seem all to be like stuck up stuck up birds. But the 3 most distinguished, partly perhaps because they were the tallest figures of the band, were the Dowager Lady Ingram and her daughters, Blanche and Mary. They were all 3 of the loftiest stature of women. The Dowager might be between 40 and 50. Her shape was still fine, her hair, by candlelight at least, still black. Her teeth, too, her teeth, you're gonna admire her teeth. Her teeth, too, were still apparently perfect. Most people would have termed her a splendid woman of her age, and so she was, no doubt, physically speaking. But then there was an expression of almost insupportable haughtiness in her bearing and countenance. She had Roman features and a double chin, disappearing into a throat like a pillar. These features appeared to me not only inflated and darkened, but even furrowed with pride, and the chin was sustained by the same principle in a position of almost preternatural erectness. By the way, is there another person here in this book that you guys remember that Jane described as like a pillar? Think back on who it was and see if we can maybe draw some conclusions. What does it mean to be like a pillar? She had likewise a fierce and a hard eye. It reminded me of Mrs. Reed's. She mouthed her words in speaking. Her voice was deep, its inflections very pompous. Its inflections very pompous, very dogmatical, very intolerable, in short. A crimson velvet robe and a shawl turban of some gold-wrought Indian fabric invested her, I suppose she thought, with a truly imperial dignity. Blanche and Mary were of equal stature, straight and tall as poplars. Mary was too slim for her height, but Blanche was molded like a Diane. I regarded her, of course, with special interest. First, I wished to see whether her appearance accorded with Mrs. Fairfax's description. Secondly, whether it all resembled the fancy miniature I had painted of her. And thirdly, it will out, whether it were such as I should fancy likely to suit Mr. Rochester's taste. Oh, Jane! As far as person went, she answered point for point, both to my picture and Mrs. Fairfax's description. The noble bust, the sloping shoulders, the graceful neck, the dark eyes and black ringlets were all there. But her face was like her mother's, a youthful, unfurrowed likeness, the same low brow, the same high features, the same pride. It was not, however, so saturine a pride. She laughed continually. Her laugh was satirical, and so was the habitual expression of her arched and haughty lip. Genius is said to be self-conscious. I cannot tell whether Miss Ingram was a genius, but she was self-conscious, remarkably self-conscious indeed. She entered into a discourse on botany with the gentle Mrs. Dent. It seemed Mrs. Dent had not studied that science, though, as she said, she liked flowers, especially wild ones. Miss Ingram had, and she ran over its vocabulary with an air. I presently perceived she was, what is vernacularly termed, trailing Mrs. Dent, that is, playing on her ignorance. Her trail might be clever, but it was decidedly not good-natured. She played. Her execution was brilliant. She sang. Her voice was fine. She talked French apart to her mamma, and she talked it well, with fluency and with good accent. Mary had a milder and more open countenance than Blanche, softer features too, and a skin some shades fairer. Miss Ingram was dark as a Spaniard, but Mary was deficient in life. Her face lacked expression, her eye luster. She had nothing to say, and having once taken her seat, remained fixed like a statue in its niche. The sisters were both attired in spotless white. And did I now think Miss Ingram such a choice as Mr. Rochester would likely to make? I could not tell. I did not know his taste in female beauty. If he liked the majestic, she was the very type of majesty. Then she was accomplished, sprightly. Most gentlemen would admire her, I thought, and that he did admire her I already seemed to have obtained proof. To remove the last shade of doubt, it remained but to see them together. You are not to suppose, reader, that Adele has all this time been sitting motionless on the stool at my feet. Oh, no. When the ladies entered, she rose, advanced to greet them, made a stately reverence, and said with gravity, "Bonjour, mesdames." And Miss Ingram had looked down at her with a mocking air, and exclaimed, "Oh, what a little puppet!" Lady Lynn had remarked, "It is Mr. Rochester's ward, I suppose, the little French girl he was speaking of." Mrs. Dent had kindly taken her hand and given her a kiss. See, I tell you, Mrs. Dent is a nice lady, and I hate the fact that Blanche is being like condescending to her. Amy and Louisa Eshton had cried out simultaneously, "What a love of a child!" And then they had called her to a sofa, where she now sat ensconced between them, chattering alternately in French and broken English, absorbing not only the young ladies' attention, but that of Mrs. Eshton and Lady Lynn, and getting spoiled to her heart's content. At last coffee is brought in, and the gentlemen are summoned. I sit in the shade, if any shade there be in this brilliantly lit apartment. The window curtain half hides me. Again the arch yawns. They come. The collective appearance of the gentlemen, like that of the ladies, is very imposing. They are all costumed in black. Most of them are tall, some young. Henry and Frederick Lynn are very dashing sparks indeed, and Colonel Dent is a fine soldierly man. Mr. Eshton, the magistrate of the district, is gentlemanlike. His hair is quite white, his eyebrows and whiskers still dark, which gives him something of the appearance of a père noble de théâtre. Father, character in tragedy and high comedy. Lord Ingram, like his sisters, is very tall. Like them also he is handsome, but he shares Mary's apathetic and listless look. He seems to have more length of limb than vivacity of blood or vigor of brain. So in all of this, the only person that has any kind of spirit is Blanche. She took all of the spirit from all her other siblings. I bet she bullied them all. No, kidding. Yeah. And finally, And where is Mr. Rochester? He comes in at last. I am not looking at the arch, yet I see him enter. I try to concentrate my attention on those netting needles, on the meshes of the purse I am forming. I wish to think only of the work I have in my hands, to see only the silver beads and silk threads that lie in my lap. Whereas I distinctly behold his figure, and I inevitably recall the moment when I last saw it, just after I had rendered him what he deemed an essential service, and he, holding my hand and looking down on my face, surveyed me with eyes that revealed a heart full and eager to overflow, in whose emotions I had a part. How near I had approached him at that moment! What occurred since, calculated to change his and my relative positions? Yet now, how distant, how far estranged we were. So far estranged that I did not expect him to come and speak to me. I did not wonder when, without looking at me, he took a seat at the other side of the room and began conversing with some of the ladies. No sooner did I see that his attention was riveted on them, that I might gaze without being observed, than my eyes were drawn involuntarily to his face. I could not keep their lids under control. They would rise, and the irids would fix on him. I looked, and had the acute pleasure in looking, a precious yet poignant pleasure, pure gold with a steely point of agony, a pleasure like what the thirst-perishing man might feel who knows the well to which he has crept is poisoned, yet stoops and drinks divine draughts nevertheless. Most true is it that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. My master's colorless olive face, square massive brow, broad and jetty eyebrows, deep eyes, strong features, firm grim mouth, all energy, decision, will, were not beautiful according to rule, but they were more than beautiful to me. They were full of an interest, an influence that quite mastered me, that took my feelings from my own power and fettered them in his. I had not intended to love him. The reader knows I had wrought hard to extirpate from my soul the germs of love there detected. And now, at the first renewed view of him, they spontaneously arrived, green and strung. He made me love him without looking at me. I compared him with his guests. What was the gallant grace of the Lynns, the languid elegance of Lord Ingram, even the military distinction of Colonel Dent, contrasted with his look of native pith and genuine power? I had no sympathy in their appearance, their expression, yet I could imagine that most observers would call them attractive, handsome, imposing, while they would pronounce Mr. Rochester at once harsh-featured and melancholy-looking. I saw them smile, laugh. It was nothing. The light of the candles had as much soul in it as their smile, the tinkle of the bell as much significance as their laugh. I saw Mr. Rochester smile. His stern features softened. His eye grew both brilliant and gentle, its ray both searching and sweet. He was talking at the moment to Louisa and Amy Eshton. I wondered to see them receive with calm that look which seemed to me so penetrating. I expected their eyes to fall, their color to rise under it. Yet I was glad when I found that they were in no sense moved. He is not to them what he is to me, I thought. He is not of their kind. I believe he is of mine. I am sure he is. I feel akin to him. I understand the language of his countenance and movements, though rank and wealth sever us widely. I have something in my heart and brain, in my blood and nerves, that assimilates me mentally to him. Did I say a few days since that I had nothing to do with him but to receive my salary at his hands? Did I forbid myself to think of him in any other light than as a paymaster? Blasphemy against nature! Every good, true, vigorous feeling I have gathers impulsively around him. I know I must conceal my sentiments. I must smother hope. I must remember that he cannot care much for me. For when I say that I am of his kind, I do not mean that I have his force to influence and his spell to attract. I mean only that I have certain tastes and feelings in common with him. I must then repeat continually that we are forever sundered. And yet, while I breathe and think, I must love him. Coffee is handed. The ladies, since the gentlemen entered, have become lively as larks. Conversation waxes brisk and merry. Colonel Dent and Mr. Eshton argue in politics. Their wives listen. The two proud dowagers, Lady Lynn and Lady Ingram, confabulate together. Sir George, whom, by the by, I have forgotten to describe, a very big and very fresh-looking country gentleman, stands before the sofa, coffee cup in hand, and occasionally puts in a word. Mr. Frederick Lynn has taken a seat beside Mary Ingram, and is showing her the engravings of a splendid volume. She looks, smiles now and then, but apparently says little. The tall and phlegmatic Lord Ingram leans with folded arms on the back chair of the little and lively Amy Eshton. She glances up at him and chatters like a wren. She likes him better than she does Mr. Rochester. Henry Lynn has taken possession of an ottoman at the feet of Louisa. Adele shares it with him. He is now trying to talk French with her, and Louisa laughs at his blunders. With whom will Blanche Ingram pair? She is standing alone at the table, bending gracefully over an album. She seems waiting to be sought, but she will not wait too long. She herself selects a mate. Mr. Rochester, having quitted the Eshtons, stands on the hearth as solitary as she stands by the table. She confronts him, taking her station on the opposite side of the mantelpiece. Mr. Rochester, I thought you were not fond of children. Nor am I. Then what induced you to take charge of such a little doll as that? She pointed to Adele. Where did you pick her up? I did not pick her up. She was left in my hands. You should have sent her to school. I could not afford it. Schools are so dear. Why, I suppose you have a governess for her. I saw a person with her just now. Is she gone? Oh, no. She is still behind the window curtain. You pay her, of course. I should think it quite as expensive. More so, for you have both of them to keep in addition. I feared, or should I say hoped, the illusion of me would make Mr. Rochester glance my way, and I involuntarily shrank further into the shade. But he never turned his eyes. I have not considered the subject, said he indifferently, looking straight before him. No, you men never do consider economy and common sense. I should hear mamma on the chapter of governesses. Mary and I have had, I should think, about a dozen, at least in our day. Half of them detestable, and the rest ridiculous, all incubi. Were they not, mamma? Did you speak my own? The young lady, thus claimed as the dowager's special property, reiterated her question with an explanation. My dearest, do not mention governesses. The word makes me nervous. I have suffered a martyrdom from their incompetency and caprice. I thank heaven I have now done with them. Mrs. Dent here bent over to the pious lady and whispered something in her ear. I suppose from the answer elicited, it was a reminder that one of the anatomized race was present. Tant pis, said her ladyship. I hope it may do her good. Then in a lower tone, but still loud enough for me to hear, I noticed her. I am a judge of physiognomy, and in hers I see the result, and in hers I see all the faults of her class. What are they, madame? Inquired Mr. Rochester aloud. I will tell you in your private ear, replied she, wagging her turban 3 times with portentous significancy. But my curiosity will be past its appetite. It craves food now. Ask Blanche. She is nearer you than I. Don't refer him to me, mamma. I have just one word to say of the whole tribe. They are a nuisance. Not that I ever suffered much from them. I took care to turn the tables. What tricks Theodore and I used to play on our Mrs. Wilsons and Miss Grace and Madame Joubert. Mary was always too sleepy to join in a plot with spirit. The best fun was with Madame Joubert. Miss Wilson was a poor sickly thing, lachrymose and low-spirited, not worth the trouble of vanquishing, in short. And Mrs. Gray was coarse and insensible. No blow took effect on her. But poor Madame Joubert! I see her yet in her raging passions when we had driven her to extremities, spilt our tea, crumbled our bread and butter, tossed up our books to the ceiling, and played at chivalry with the ruler and desk, the fender and fire irons. Theodore, do you remember those merry days? Yes, to be sure I do, drawled Lord Ingram, And the poor old stick used to cry out, "Oh, you villains, Charles!" And then we sermonized her on the presumptions of attempting to teach us clever blades as we were, when she herself was too ignorant. We did. And Thither, do you know, I helped you in prosecuting, or persecuting, your tutor, whey-faced Mr. Vinning, the parson in the pip, as we used to call him. He and Miss Wilson took the liberty of falling in love with each other. At least Theodore and I thought so. We surprised sundry tender glances and sighs, which we interpreted as tokens of la belle passion, and I promise you the public soon had the benefit of our discovery. We employed it as a sort of lever to hoist our deadweights from the house. Dear mamma, there, as soon as she got an inkling of the business, found out that it was of immoral tendency. Did you not, my lady mother? Certainly, my best, and I was quite right. Depending on that, there was 1,000 reasons why liaisons between governesses and tutors should never be tolerated a moment in any well-regulated house. Firstly, oh, gracious mamma, spare us the enumeration. Rest, we all know them. Danger of bad example to innocence of childhood, distractions and consequent neglect of duty on the part of the attached, mutual alliance and reliance, confidence thence resulting, insolence accompanying, mutiny and general blow-up. Am I right, Baroness Ingram of Ingram Park? My lily flower, you are right now, as always. Then, no more need to be said. Change the subject. Amy Ashton, not hearing or heeding this dictum, joined in with her soft infantine tone. Louisa and I used to quiz our governess too, but she was such a good creature. She would bear anything. Nothing put her out. She was never cross with us, was she, Louisa? No, never. We might do what we pleased, ransack her desk and work-box, and turn her drawers inside out, and she was so good-natured she would give us anything we asked for. I suppose now, said Miss Ingram, curling her lip sarcastically, we shall have an abstract of the memoirs of all the governess extant. In order to avert such a visitation, I again move the induction of a new topic. Mr. Rochester, do you second the motion? Madam, I support you on this point, as on every other. Then on me be the onus of bringing it forward. Signor Eduardo, are you in voice tonight? Donna Bianca, if you command it, I will be. Then, signor, I lay on you my sovereign behest to furbish up your lungs and your and other vocal organs, as they will be wanted on my royal service. Who would not be the Rizzio of so divine a Mary? A fig for Rizzio, cried she, tossing her head with all its curls as she moved to the piano. It is my opinion the fiddler David must have been an insipid sort of fellow. I like Black Bothwell better. To my man, a man is nothing without a spice of the devil in him. And history may say what it will of James Hepburn, but I have a notion he was just the sort of wild, fierce, bandit hero whom I would have consented to gift with my hand. Gentlemen, you hear. Now which of you most resembles Bothwell? Cried Mr. Rochester. I should think the preference lies with you, responded Colonel Dent. On my honor, I am much obliged to you, was the reply. Miss Ingram, who had now seated herself with proud grace at the piano, spreading out her snowy robes in queenly amplitude, commenced a brilliant prelude, talking meantime. She appeared to be on her high horse tonight. Both her words and her air seemed intended to excite not only the admiration but the amazement of her auditors. She was evidently bent on striking them as something very dashing and daring indeed. Oh, I am so sick of the young men of the present day, exclaimed she, rattling away at the instrument. Poor puny things, not fit to stir a step beyond papa's park gates, not go even so far without mamma's permission and guardianship. Creatures so absorbed in care about their pretty faces and their white hands and their small feet, as if a man had anything to do with beauty, as if loveliness were not the special prerogative of woman, her legitimate appanage and heritage. I grant an ugly woman is a blot on the face of creation, but as to gentlemen, let them be solicitous to possess only strength and valor. Let their motto be hunt, shoot, and fight. The rest is not worth a fillip. Such should be my device were I a man. Whenever I marry, she continued after a pause which none interrupted, I am resolved my husband shall not be a rival, but a foil to me. I will suffer no competitor near the throne. I shall exact an undivided homage. His devotion shall not be shared between me and the shape he sees in the mirror. Mr. Rochester, now sing, and I will play for you. I am all obedience, was the response. Here, then, is a corsair's song. Know that I dote on corsairs, and for that reason sing it con spirito. Commands from Miss Ingram's lips would put spirit into a mug of milk and water. Take care, then. If you don't please me, I will shame you by showing how such things should be done. That is offering a premium on incapacity. I shall now endeavor to fail. Gardez-vous bien. If you err wilfully, I shall devise a proportionate punishment. Miss Ingram ought to be clement. No, Miss Ingram ought to be clement, for she has it in her power to inflict a chastisement beyond moral endurance. Ha! Explain. Pardon me, madam, no need for explanation. Your own fine sense must inform you that one of your frowns would be a sufficient substitute for capital punishment. Sing, said she, and again touching the piano, she commenced an accompaniment in spirited style. Now it is my time to slip away, thought I, but the tones that then severed the air arrested me. Mrs. Fairfax had said Mr. Rochester possessed a fine voice. He did. A mellow, powerful bass into which he threw his own feeling, his own force, finding a way through the ear to the heart, and there waking sensation strangely. I waited till the last deep and full vibration had expired, till the tide of talk, checked an instant, had resumed its flow. I then quitted my sheltered corner and made my exit by the side door, which was fortunately near. Thence a narrow passage led into the hall. In crossing it, I perceived my sandal was loose. I stopped to tie it, kneeling down for that purpose on the mat at the foot of the staircase. I heard the dining room door unclose. A gentleman came out. Rising hastily, I stood face to face with him. It was Mr. Rochester. "How do you do?" he asked. "I am very well, sir." Why did you not come and speak to me in the room?" I thought I might have retorted the question on him to put it, but I would not take that freedom. I answered, "I do not wish to disturb you, as you seemed engaged, sir." "What have you been doing during my absence?" "Nothing particular. Teaching Adele as usual." "And getting a good deal paler than you were, as I saw at first sight. What's the matter?" "Nothing at all, sir." "Did you take any cold that night you half drowned me?" "Not the least." "Return to the drawing room. You are deserting too early." "I am tired, sir." He looked at me for a minute. "And a little depressed. What about? Tell me." Nothing, sir. I am not depressed." "But I affirm that you are. So much depressed that a few more words would bring tears to your eyes. Indeed, there they are now, shining and swimming, and a bead has slipped from the lash and fallen on to the flag. If I had the time, and was not in mortal dread of some prating pig, prating prig of a servant passing, I would know what it all means. Well, tonight I excuse you, but understand that so long as my visitors stay, I expect you to appear in the drawing-room every evening. It is my wish. Don't neglect it. Now go and send Sophie for Adele. Good night, my—" He stopped, bit his lip, and abruptly left me. End of chapter. What was he gonna say, you guys? What was he gonna say? Good night, my what? We are wondering what he was gonna say. Doesn't matter. We'll know by and by. So, Rochester brought home all these people, and these people, for the most part, are like really ugly people. Perhaps not externally, but internally, they're the worst. Maybe except for Mrs. Cornell Dent and her husband. Probably they're the only decent folk. All the other, and maybe the other Amy and her sister. I don't know. But yeah, the fact that she has to go downstairs every evening as long as his visitors are there, that's gonna be such a trial. Oh my gosh. Why, Rochester? Why? Every cell, every nerve ending in my introvert body absolutely recoils from such a sentence. Oh man. Okay, so I think I saw. So welcome Noodle Something's Kimchi. Hope you're still here. Hope you enjoyed the read. Let's see. Blockstrid says, getting threatened by her boss to get literally dragged to the party, right? Oh man, I would get it if it was like, okay, we have to like company culture outing that will foster good relationships between coworkers, fine. But this is just like, what? Just have to stay up late and look at people do stupid things and talk about stupid things. It's like, oh man. And Crusher says it's all voluntary though. She has the option to resign. Yeah, but she has to first find a place, and it took her a month just to get the spot she had at Thornfield. Of course, there were several other hoops she had to jump through. But it's gonna take a while, at least a week, to send off the advertisement, then a week for it to like receive any reply, and then another week to send all her references, and then maybe another week just to like give Rochester her notice. So it's easier said than done that she has the option to resign. She could resign. In this world, but it was a bit harder then. But yeah, it would be lovely if she were free to do as she pleased, but unfortunately, no. This is something the master said, and what master says is the way. Let's see. Crusher does point out Blanche Ingram reminds me of Detland. Oh no, no one tell Noemi. Yeah, Detland. We always have to find Detlands here and there, right? And always, I think when I did the Blue Castle, I don't know if I made the Detland voice, but Olive was certainly being, insufferable. So every book has a Detland, I suppose. Literature Detland is here, says Noodles, Dumplings, Kimchi. Yes. We don't want a Detland horde here, but it will probably get here at some point, maybe one day. I don't know. And then Crusher says, wow, she said all that about governesses knowing full well that Jane was there. Jealous much? Not jealous much. I don't think she's jealous. Like the whole idea of a governess and her master, Rochester is a very proud man, so it would never have, struck them at all that there was anything that to be jealous about. More like, it's even worse because there's not even like jealousy there. It's just being evil natured, just bad natured. It's just her bad nature doing bad things for no reason at all. Jane did nothing to her, absolutely nothing. She's just hideous like that. And the same way she looked at Adele and she treated her immediately with like a look of condescension and scorn too, which makes you wonder what kind of stepmother she would be. Just saying, like, how would she treat Adele if and when Rochester marries her? Just saying. I mean, there's no spoilers, but yeah. Okay, Crusher says, farewell everyone, I must return from lunch break. Okay, enjoy the rest of the read when you do the replay, I suppose. And thank you for joining today. And I'm done for today, so we did quite a lot of reading today. I think I need to rest my throat now. Yesterday I did a read along over on my Discord server. We're trying to finish part 5 volume 9, so we did that and it was fun, but we did do a lot of chapters, and as a narrator it did take quite a bit of stamina. So here I am again doing more reading because I love reading, And yeah, I'm excited because we took a good chunk out of Jane Eyre. We are now, let's see, 242 divided by 6.2 equals, we are now 40% done with the book. So we're not yet quite halfway through, but we are. Yeah, Liz Leper says, my dear, the word that Rochester said, that he had to bite the word back. He said, good night, my. He stopped, bit his lip, and abruptly left me. Yes, my dear. It could have been my dear. Good, excellent guess. Yeah, I think at this point he's just being, I don't know. I can't get a good read on Rochester. We'll get more information now later on, but right now it's just like he's an enigma. So anyway, so Blockshort says, being dragged there once, okay, twice, man, every evening. This is a personal vendetta, right? Like, why do you want her to be there every single night, man? Oh gosh, especially if they're gonna continue to treat her, or like, yeah, it's gonna be tough. So F on the chat for Jane, the introvert. Or just not even the introvert. It's not quite the punishment for introvert, as long as you're left alone. But like the actual, like what the actual F, you know, like you didn't do anything, and these people are gonna bad mouth you while you're there, and you have to listen to their insupportable, like honestly, you guys, how cringy was Blanche Ingram? Like, she was like so like, oh my gosh, I'm the queen, and like trying to make a show of herself. It was honestly embarrassing, very embarrassing, and to have to see more of this, oh gosh, no. Anyway, so that is all today that we have for today. Let me know what you thought about these these new developments. Especially I didn't quite talk about Grace Poole at first, but Jane at first had like a suspicion that maybe because of a youthful indiscretion, Mr. Rochester is, you know, is beholden in some way to Grace Poole. Who knows? There's something going on. But then we also hear from the servants about her being, you know, having to do a job only she can do and getting paid handsomely for it. Wonder what that is. We'll see. I don't know, you guys. I hope you are all doing well. Again, no spoilers, and I hope that you join me next week. Not next week. I'm sorry, you guys. I'm in pre-pub mode. Well, do join me tomorrow for pre-pub on the other channel if you're on pre-pub, and join me on Wednesday for the next read-along. Probably in the afternoon. We'll see. More likely than not, it will be in the afternoon. Still check your notifications. Make sure that they're on. Check X, and where I will post the announcement. And also, if you're enjoying these and like to support the channel, you can do so by, you know, donating $3 or the price of a coffee over on my Ko-fi page. Or just, you know, share this with all your friends. That's helpful enough. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me today. I had a lot of fun, but now my throat is telling me go rest. Until then, you guys, see you Wednesday.